I wasn't into comics at all. I wanted to be a political cartoonist. I served my apprenticeship. The thing that really propelled me into the Nationals was working for a paper called Financial Weekly, where I was actually doing political stuff, but with a financial bent, and so about company reports about which I know nothing. I still don't understand the difference between a bear and a bull market, but I did understand the important training that was to work to a brief, which every cartoonist and illustrator's got to do. You've got to work to a brief. And if you're a political cartoonist, the brief is the news that day. No, I've been an avid consumer of comics. I think I bought my first 2000 AD. I think Prog 36 was the first one I bought. So quite early on. And I just thought it was fantastic. I thought, no child should be allowed to read this stuff. It's utterly disgraceful. And I'd had ideas to do comics and to do comic books, but they'd never really come to anything until I was discussing with my agent my third book. My first book was a series of stupid puns called Scenes from the Lives of the Great Socialists, just lots and lots of stupid puns about the dicta of Marxism, as you do, and people like that. My second book was called Lower Than Vermin, An Anatomy of Thatcher's Britain, self-explanatory. And I was having lunch with my agent, and we were discussing what I should do next. And he said, "Well, just get off the politics for a bit. Just get off the. There's too much of that going around. What do you really, really hate, apart from this government?" And I said, "You know what? I really hate T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland. I really fucking hate that poem because it's cast a shadow over 20th century British poetry, because you've got to be some kind of obscurantist fascist in order to write poetry, and it will only be comprehensible to you and 3 of your friends. And thousands of people used to gather to listen to Tennyson reading In Memoriam. Now you have people writing stuff about their innermost feelings, which is of no interest to anybody else, or it's incomprehensible." And so I said, "All right, go away and think about that, see what you can come up with." And I was thinking about things I could do, and I thought, we could have the T.S. Eliot Wasteland colouring book, colour this rock black, colour this rock red, colour Mr. Eliot's mood black, and that kind of thing. And then, in a moment of revelation, I put together, this is how cartoons work, actually, this is how political cartoons work. You use metaphors, so you have 2 things, something happening in the news, and you collide it with some other image or some other event, and you produce something new. And I suddenly remembered that scene in Howard Hawks's The Big Sleep, where they're dredging the Sternwood family's chauffeur inside his Packard out of the bay. A scene which, when they were filming it, Bogart said to Howard Hawks, "I don't understand how this fits into the rest of the plot." And Hawks said, "I don't know, I'm just a director." So he asked the script writers, and they said, "Well, we don't know." So they rang up Raymond Chandler and said, "I've forgotten." Which was perfect, because it was about, the wasteland is obscure. How on earth are you meant to work out what it means? And I suddenly collided that with the beginning of part 4 of The Wasteland, Death by Water. It was Phlebas the Phoenician, a fortnight dead. And it was I just had the image in my head with the caption, "It was Phlebas the Phoenician, he'd been dead a fortnight." And so I thought, this is a film noir. I'll turn it into a film noir. And what will really upset the Eliot estate, I'll turn it into a comic book as well. So I turned it into a comic book film noir. They hated it. They tried to suppress it. They wouldn't let me quote any lines from the poem, including any of the quotations, because it was covered by compilation copyright. And I suddenly found myself not only in the vanguard of the postmodern, because this was a genuinely postmodernist thing, because he was a modernist and I was after him, and I was turning The Wasteland into a comic book, but also into the first wave of the comics revolution, because Penguin published it. They'd just done Mouse and Tank Girl, and they got very excited about this, except they were overexcited. It's when the chief executive of a party said, "We're terribly excited about this, Martin, we're terribly excited. Very much word of mouth, we think." And I thought, oh shit, there's no publicity budget. How on earth are they going to sell this? And they sort of described it on the back as literary criticism, stroke graphic novels, stroke poetry. So no bookshop knew where to put the bloody thing. And after 18 months, it was pulped. But as is the nature of these things, it took on a life of its own. It sort of became a kind of samizdat thing in American universities. Tattered photocopied copies of it were being handed out to students because it helped them reach the poem. It wasn't meant to do that, it was meant to take the piss out of the poem, but apparently it was an homage. Suddenly it turned itself into an homage. And then it got turned into an opera, which was the obvious next step for a comic book version of The Wasteland. And then it was republished by Picador in the end of the 90s, first published in 1990, and then reissued. It's still in print from a publisher called Seagull. And it is a set text in American universities, which is not what I intended, but I don't mind. I'm rather pleased with that. But at the same time, in the uneasy world of academe, where I came to take the piss, but I was seen to be, like students' notes, I also found myself in the realm of comics. So Igor Goldkind, of blessed memory, interviewed me for Deadline, possibly, I think it was Deadline. And so who wrote the script? I did. Oh. And you did all the artwork, yeah. So who did the inking in? No, I did that. Well, what about the lettering? I did that. No, this is making no sense to me at all. And there was an insight into a world I admired from the outside, I knew very little about. And suddenly people started saying that The Wasteland was their favourite comic. And it was never really meant to be a comic, it was meant to take the piss. Even through its medium it was meant to take the piss, because I could think of nothing the Eliot estate would hate more than a comic book version of The Wasteland.